Hello there, and welcome. Well, I started talking about evaluation yesterday, and I realized something that's a little bit interesting. I don't think a lot of people know about how it kind of works for teachers when they start working, and maybe not even teachers. If you've never had a job as a teacher and you've never lived with teachers, you may not know some of these things. So let's start with the hiring. Uh, Even before the evaluation and before any possible, firing. So, hiring. When you get interviewed for a job, you can have a number of different kind of interviews. There are a lot of different kinds of interviews that are done for teachers. And then you have this particular portion that's usually with going to be your main supervisor and maybe with a superintendent or somebody fairly high up in the hierarchy of the school, where you talk about salary and the contract. So, the first thing you need to know is that typically teachers' contracts are written with a specific number of days of service in them. Okay? Whereas other people who work for schools oftentimes have a more standard working arrangement where they get paid so much per hour and they get comp time and that kind of stuff. Teachers get a little different thing. They get this typically 9-month contract, sometimes longer, but it doesn't say 9 months. It'll say so many contact days. And I think my last one had 193 contact days, which meant 180 teaching days and then 13 days of other time. And it often says in there how you will be paid. In other words, how many checks you'll get and kind of in what timing. So for a long part of my career, I would get checks up through the beginning of the summer, and then for the summer I'd have like a big chunk of money. Now that wasn't in all situations. There were schools that divided it up over 12 or 24 checks over the year, but a lot of them give you this big chunk of money at the beginning of the summer break. And that's sort of interesting because you either learn to budget or you have a rough time of it. And I've known teachers that have had both. Generally speaking, I was okay with the budgeting. I don't really recall a year where I ran completely out. But I have known people that were really running on fumes. The other thing is they will tell you about their methods of rewarding longevity. And oftentimes that's through a pay schedule. Now, a lot of people who are not in the education game do not know that when you get hired, you're pretty much on a fixed schedule of money. You only really discuss money once, or maybe twice. If you end up with another responsibility for which there's extra pay given, you may discuss that. That I have had to do that. But generally speaking, they show you the pay schedule and they tell you where you would come in on it. So a lot of times it has things arranged across the top and then things down the side. Across the top is your professional position as far as your education or certifications, okay? And down the side is usually the years of service. So let's say that you have no years of service and you have no added qualifications or certifications or anything like that. You're just a baby starting teacher. You'd start in the far upper left corner and you'd see this stepwise system go down usually. Now, not all schools do this. Some of them hold off on the increments, like you have to wait 5 years to get your first increment. But I think most schools have found that a little raise every year over 5 years works better than a big chunky raise every 5 years because it's just easier to cope with. But generally speaking, that ladder just kind of works. And what I found was when I moved schools, they would offer me a certain amount of stuff on that schedule, like where I would be placed. And the last time I moved schools, when I went from public schools to semi-private, sort of semi-private, special school, the military school, when I moved, I had 20 years of teaching experience, but they could not reward those 20 years. They brought me in at 15. So I came in a little lower on the schedule than somebody else with those many years. So one of the things that we kind of worked out was, what rank would I come in as? Because your academic rank is not pay driven, like it's just a title. It's more education driven. So I had my terminal degree, the last degree I needed, and I had licensure, and I had 20 years of experience. So they went, what can we do? And I said, well, okay, I can accept this because it is going to be a pay raise anyway. And they said, oh, that's good. And I said, yeah. And they said, what rank do you want to come in as? And I said, well, it doesn't really matter to me that much what rank you give me, since it doesn't affect my pay. And they said, well, it may not matter to you, but it matters around here. And so I said, okay, what is the highest rank I can have? And so I was hired as a lieutenant colonel, which I didn't know at the time would cause a lot of jealousy. It did. But that's okay. I lived through it, and that was fine. A lot of schools no longer offer tenure, but on the contract, it will say that sometimes. It will say whether or not you will be eventually eligible for tenure. Some schools offer it, a lot of them don't. You're an at-will employee. At-will means they can choose at the end of the year not to rehire you and not tell you why. They don't necessarily have to have a reason for not rehiring you. So it's kind of a bummer, that part, the at-will part. When you sign that contract, one of the great things about being a teacher is that contract, that's the deal with the money that you have to sign. And typically, if you don't want to get involved with negotiations over money, if you don't want to be involved in contract system negotiations and with pay levels in your district, if you don't want to participate in that kind of stuff, you don't have to talk about money ever again. I spent big chunks of my time as a teacher not worried about money. I wasn't going to make a lot. I knew that. I had made peace with that. I made, it was okay. I wasn't able to do just anything I wanted to, but I was able to live. And the blessing of not having to talk about money or think about money or compete for money all the time was pretty delightful. I think it's very difficult for people who aren't into money to deal with a system whereby they are constantly having to negotiate about it. So that's kind of how it goes. You sign your contract, and then they're not supposed to change it on you. It's been set, and you go for a year, and you get your pay, and then hopefully before the end of the year, you get told, we've got a new contract for you. And they bring it in and they add a little money to it. And you sign it, and then you're ready for your next year. It's kind of wonderful. A lot of people complain about how little they're paid. It's not just teachers. A lot of people complain about how little they're paid. Teachers do. It's part of their habit. It's part of their nature. But the truth is, for me, it was a great blessing that I didn't have to think about money all the time. And because New Mexico has such a wonderful system for taking out retirement deposits, I was able to deposit a healthy amount in my retirement account each year, and it made my life now caring for my mother much easier. So, next week I'll talk more about hierarchy and about the challenges of facing evaluation. That's it for today. I hope you have a glorious rest of the day, and I hope you see me again. You gorgeous people.